She stood in the cold cathedral hall, her hands clasped in front of her, the silk of her gown whispering against stone floors, her lips barely moving as she repeated vows written not for love, but for politics. And though she was just 15, her eyes did not blink, because Eleanor of Aquitaine had already learned that a crown does not make you powerful. It only makes you a target. This is not just a story of love. This is a story of betrayal, power, and revenge. Of a queen who waited years to take back what was stolen, and burned to empires to the ground to do it. In the year 1137, when the skies over Aquitaine seemed unusually gray, and the church bells tolled with unease, Eleanor became Duchess of Aquitaine, heiress to the richest lands in France, ruling over vineyards, trade routes, and a noble legacy that went back centuries. Yet all that power, gathered from generations of dukes, fit into the hands of a teenage girl who suddenly found herself the most sought-after bride in Europe. Not because of beauty or birth, but because her lands could make or break a kingdom. The moment her father died, the French crown moved faster than her grief could set in, sending royal messengers to secure her hand for Prince Louis, the quiet, monkish son of King Louis VI, who, though barely older than Eleanor herself, had already been groomed by the church more than by war or politics, and believed, somewhat naively, that virtue and God's will alone would be enough to rule a realm. Their marriage was swift, arranged within weeks, celebrated with pomp in the grand halls of Bordeaux. The air thick with incense and whispered ambition, where Eleanor, in silver-stitched white, looked more like a queen than the future king looked like a ruler. And even then, as Latin vows were spoken over them, she sensed that this marriage would be less of a union and more of a cage. But Eleanor was no ordinary bride, and Aquitaine no ordinary dowry. She traveled with Louis not like a servant or a silent companion, but as a political partner, often voicing her thoughts in court, sharply, intelligently, to the discomfort of the bishops and lords who were not used to such presence from a woman, much less a queen. When the Second Crusade erupted in 1147, Eleanor, ever determined to control her own fate, refused to remain behind in France like a passive consort, and instead demanded to join her husband in the Holy Land, citing her duties as Duchess and the need to protect her vassals. And though Louis hesitated, the world watched in awe as a queen donned armor and rode eastward her retinue of knights from Aquitaine. But the crusade was cursed from the start, plagued by poor planning, betrayal among allies, and a growing divide between husband and wife. And when Eleanor's closeness with her uncle Raymond of Antioch drew rumors of scandal, Louis, humiliated and enraged, accused her of treasonous conduct and dragged her back across seas. Not only broken from war, but broken in marriage. By 1152, she demanded annulment on grounds of consanguinity, a technicality about blood relations that was often ignored for political convenience. But in this case was accepted with relief, as the French court had grown tired of her fire, her presence, her refusal to submit. Eleanor left Louis not just as a rejected wife, but as a woman now feared for what she might do next, and she wasted no time proving them right. Only 8 weeks after her annulment, before the ink had fully dried on the papal decree, Eleanor stunned Europe again by marrying a man nearly 12 years her junior, a bold and ambitious heir to the English throne named Henry Plantagenet, a warrior prince whose bloodline ran through Normandy, Anjou, and a claim to England that would soon be undeniable. They had met before, years earlier, during diplomatic exchanges, when she was still Queen of France and he a fiery-eyed Duke of little means but great ambition. And though many claimed it was love at first sight, others suspected that Eleanor had simply chosen the next player in her long game of power, a partner who would listen, fight, and share the throne, not strip it from her hands. At just 19, Henry was unlike Louis in every possible way: impulsive, battle-hardened, energetic to the point of exhaustion. A man who read military maps the way monks read scripture, and who viewed kingdoms not as divine responsibilities, but as prizes to be claimed and kept. Their union was electric, not merely political, but passionate and volatile. And when Henry seized the English crown in 1154, after a brief civil war, Eleanor became queen once more, this time of a land even mightier than France, with an empire that stretched from Scotland to the Mediterranean and a treasury fattened by taxes, wool, and steel. In the early years, they were unstoppable, riding together across provinces, issuing royal charters, raising children and armies alike. And their partnership, though unconventional, terrified rivals who could not imagine what might come from a queen who wielded real power, and a king who was too stubborn to rein her in. But as the years passed and Henry grew more consumed by governance, foreign wars, and his obsession with legacy, the love that once burned between them began to cool, then simmer, and eventually boil over, especially as his list of mistresses grew and Eleanor, once cherished, became sidelined, her influence replaced by younger courtiers and his scheming advisers. The final insult came when Henry, without consultation, declared that their beloved Aquitaine would pass not to Eleanor's care, but directly to their son, Richard, thereby cutting her off from the very lands that had made her powerful, an act she saw not just as betrayal, but as war. Betrayed by the man she had helped crown, Eleanor began to reach deep into the veins of her family, turning her own sons, Henry the young king, Richard and Geoffrey, against their father in a rebellion that spanned England, Normandy, and Aquitaine, fueled by promises of inheritance, whispers of injustice, and the cold, calculated fury of a mother who would not die in the dark. It was 1173, and the revolt of the sons, as it came to be known, was one of the most dangerous internal conflicts in medieval England, because it was not foreign invaders who rose up, but the king's own blood, led by the queen he had once adored. Eleanor raised troops in Aquitaine, forged letters to allies across France, and encouraged her sons to take up arms, while Henry, caught between war abroad and rebellion at home, found himself besieged by sons he could not control, and a wife he had imprisoned in gilded courts for far too long. But fate, as it often does, favored the tyrant. The rebellion failed. Henry, with ruthless precision, crushed the armies of his children, executed their allies, and, in one of the coldest decisions of his reign, ordered Eleanor captured while she fled, disguised in men's clothing, an act that shocked even his staunchest supporters. She was locked away in various castles across England, silenced, watched, and left to rot. For 16 years, she remained in captivity, allowed to see no one freely, write no letters without inspection, and attend no court unless summoned like a servant. Her title remained, but her freedom vanished, and yet she waited. Because vengeance for Eleanor was never a single moment. It was always a strategy. In 1189, King Henry II, once the firebrand of Europe, lay dying, his body rotting from within, betrayed by the only son he still trusted, and haunted by the name of the woman he had locked away for nearly 2 decades. And in his final breaths, he learned that Richard, the son Eleanor had groomed, advised, and molded, was now crowned Richard the Lionheart, and the first act of his reign was to release his mother. Eleanor, now 67, emerged from captivity, not as a broken woman, but as a legend reborn, riding across Europe with her silver hair flowing behind her, arranging political alliances, stabilizing her son's rule, and writing letters that would become the foundation of diplomatic etiquette in courts across Christendom. She acted as regent while Richard left for the Crusades, ruled in his absence, negotiated his ransom when he was captured, and even outlived the very sons who had once rebelled beside her. She died in 1204, not in silence or in obscurity, but as the last lioness of an age defined by iron, fire, and forgotten queens. And though history remembers her for her marriages to a king of France and a king of England, it was her choices, her courage, and her vengeance that redrew the map of Europe. Because Eleanor of Aquitaine was never just a wife or a widow. She was an empress forged in betrayal. And her story reminds us that, sometimes, the fiercest wars begin not with armies, but with a broken vow. If you found yourself caught in the fire of Eleanor's fury, if this story made you feel the weight of crowns and the sting of betrayal, then subscribe to Shadows of the Past, where true stories burn brighter than fiction. Because history doesn't whisper, it roars.